Hello and welcome to Meet the Media. I'm Eusebius Mckaiser. There are many unsung heroes in broadcast media with titles that you've heard of before, and you probably wondered, what do they do? How much power do they have, especially over overzealous presenters, obviously not like myself, and why are they seldom celebrated? In this special pre-recorded broadcast, we focus on producers in television and radio, as well as the makeup artists that ensure that you never get to see my real face on television. And the first two guests that will be joining me, who are specialists, particularly in radio, are Lance Claassen, who's been an executive producer, has also had to look after a bunch of other producers under his wing at various platforms, including most recently, his career at Kaya FM, and of course 702's Andis Makanda, who's been in charge of many shows on the 702 and Cape Talk platform as well. Guys, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for having us.
What is it like being on this side? Because you're usually the control freaks behind the scene.
I'm nervous because I've never had to be on the other side, so I don't know how to feel, but it's good to be on this side.
For me, it's strangely relaxing because I know that other person, somebody else is going to have to run around and do the crazy stuff, and, so I can just sit here and enjoy the ride.
Lance, what is the role of a producer?
It varies, from station to station, person to person, show to show. So it's the easiest one, or it's like you virtually the PA to the presenter, which is not supposed to be. And the more complex one, you're in charge of all the content that goes out. And so what it actually is like a communion of two minds in order to get something really great out of the show. So, you know, I prefer to think of myself as the person that was responsible for the content, but more times than not, I ended up being a PA of some kind.
Making the coffee, making sure that the person is happy. But where does the real power lies? Because South African radio is very personality driven. It's dominated, you know, it's like the John Robbie show. It is not the morning show on 702. How much do you in reality get to influence the narrative, the choice of guests, which economists you speak to, which commentators, who calls the shots?
You know, I'm glad you asked this question because a friend of mine once said to me, you know, you're the most powerful person in this in society. And I was like, but what do you mean? Because here's a presenter, there's me, the producer. Where does the power lie? But when I'm going to speak about the breakfast show, it's a balance. It's a two-way. We both influence each other. If John, for example, feels that I'm more, my angle, my suggestions, the guest suggestions are much powerful than his, are much powerful, then he will go with my idea. At some point where we can't find, we can't agree, it's always merit. Who has the stronger? Sometimes I'll let John have it. Yeah. There are days where John will be like, I'm not feeling this, I'm not in the mood, I don't want to do this.
Lance, is she being diplomatic? Because you guys moan off air about presenters, so-called talent.
Yes.
And isn't the truth that sometimes you get bullied? You don't get the love and the recognition that you deserve, even when it comes to decisions. I mean, if John Pullman had to say to you on Kaya, where you used to work, listen, I'm just not feeling this guest. So that's the end of the discussion. How often does merit determine the choices?
In many ways, you produce a person rather than a show. So your aim is to get the best out of the person. So it's an endless, being a producer is a bridesmaid's position. You're not there, the show's not named after you, nobody sees you, nobody hears you. Your aim is to make Eusebius be his best, you know? And sometimes you have to push Eusebius to be his best, and sometimes you have to allow him to be his best.
And I want to concur with Lance, because sometimes you don't want to force something onto the presenter, because the minute you do that, then they'll mess up that interview. You know that's not going to go the way it's supposed to be. So you rather negotiate with the presenter. If they still don't get it, they still don't want it, back off.
So how do you guys build that relationship, right? I mean, I've got my producer in my ear saying me, ask them how do they build that relationship. So now she's there busy like chewing her nails, wondering, will he ask that question? How do you build a relationship so that you know I'm not going to be left hanging if I try and direct my presenter? He might trust me that that's a good way to segue the conversation.
With different presenters, you have different relationships. For example, with me working with Pullman or John Matham or Tim Modise, it's like going to school every day. I'm literally there and I'm learning, you know? It's like...
Kino Kamis?
Not so much.
And these You've worked with different people. They're different personalities you work with, right?
You know, but...
Not all of them can school you.
You know, for example, where somebody has a great strength on one hand and someone is weak on the other hand. So, for example, someone like Kino, we were sitting in studio when the plane went into the first building on the World Trade Center. So we were live. The show was happening as it. So we had to yank guests out. I was on the phone to New York trying to get somebody to describe what was going in. Walid Ajawa, who was the sound engineer, who takes over producing the show. I'm not even listening to the show, and Kino kept it going for that entire hour. So it was a moment in our lives that we will always go back to. And sometimes there are people that can handle that, and Kino could handle that on the day, And then sometimes people couldn't handle it,
Okay,
So, and then what ends up happens in that Walid ends up being a producer and starts working for eNCA at one point, I think as well.
I want to talk about what happens behind the scenes. I mean, the other great thing about South African radio, as both of you know, is that it's also caller driven. It's personality centric, but it's also caller centric. Andiswa. Sometimes people say to me as an on-air radio presenter, gosh, the callers you have to deal with, they don't realize that those callers already come through a filter. What happens behind the scenes? What is the call screening part of your job?
So because it's talk radio, so it's more on interaction, listener and presenter interaction. So you need to get the right calls to drive the show forward, to keep it more engaging. So the type of calls that you get onto the show, you need to screen them. You need to know that, do they add value to the conversation that's on the table? So there's a lot of screening that goes.
Okay.
And over years, you develop a skill where you know that this person, this type of voice will not work here. This type of person is going to go on air and
Why
say
not?
something different, hey?
Do you guys curate the conversation you want to have?
No, we always ask the questions like, what do you want to say to Eusebius? What do you want to talk about? No, I want to agree with Eusebius. The minute they say, I want to agree with what Eusebius is saying, you know that that's not what they're going to do. And the one thing that a lot of people don't know is the abuse that goes on behind the scenes. You know, you want to cry every day. We get sawn at. You called monkeys. We called all sorts of things, you know, especially on a platform like
I'm so sorry I don't have a tissue here.
I know.
Lance, how do you deal with that kind of abuse? Because that seems like a lot that you got to filter.
Yeah, that's
And also to protect the ego of your presenter.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, I'm sure someone probably calls in and says, "That racist, take him off."
So luckily for me that I haven't been on the front end of it for a long time. And also when you negotiate with people, you're saying, would you like to be called that? Sometimes, you go to the trolls and you bring humanity to them, and then suddenly, oh my gosh, someone's taken the moral high ground with them, and they don't know how to act a moral high ground that's more compassionate. So you act with compassion, you act with sincerity, and that brings it into a human interaction rather than this guy's a moron,
Okay, I want you guys to step back a little bit from this role, right? So the media is a funny business. You often think that, if you have a kid who's incredibly intelligent, you're not going to say to him, my boy, you would make for a great producer for the John Robbie show. You think that he must go and study business science at UCT. I've known you guys for a long time, both of you, and this is utterly sincere. You are incredibly smart, you're very analytic. You could have had many other different career paths. Why do you value the production side of radio in a country where you don't always get the due recognition for your role in public discourse?
I love that question, Eusebius. It's a conversation that I have with myself, that why am I still doing this till this day? Because it's blood, sweat and tears. Every day I want to quit. When I walk in, I'm like, oh my goodness. But when there's breaking news stories, when things happen and you have the power to drive the narrative, to call the different people, to be right in the mix of the drama. That's what makes it exciting, finding the different angles. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get the listeners onto your show? I think that drives me. That's the adrenaline I get, when eNCA happens, when Fees Must Fall happens, when Praveen Gordhan is the finance minister is charged.
It's where Gupta's happened.
Yes, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm right in the mix of all of this. How can I put it together, package it for listeners to get
What about
in?
you, Lance? You understand
That's what
business,
I
you've got
love.
an MBA, there's many things that you can do. But there are very few of my friends and peers in the industry that have your passion. It's very hard to be with you and not talk about radio.
Of course, because radio is in your blood. It's like people that I want to work with when I fully open my consultancy practice is that I need people who love radio. That's it. Because you have to understand the mechanics of it. The fact that in 1999 I informed the IEC that the elections were taking place, or the election day. How many professions can have that kind of that level of influence and insights? When people come in when the Nkanda report was in, Tuli Matansela comes to the studio and you get to engage with her on that kind of platform. So this is where you sail very close to the wind in terms of change in South Africa, and that's, you know, it's like a gift that you've had, and you know, in all the money in the world can't take away the 20 years I've had in radio.
Well, that's why you're underpaid, which is like your passion. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. I guess with this kind of special broadcast, I'd better listen to the voice in my ear that's telling me it's time to move on, but it's been a pleasure having you on this show.
Thank you, it's been lovely.
Please do stay with us. After this television, you might think that production processes are the same, but of course the image and other elements of TV makes it a different ball game. And after the break, I'll be speaking to a couple of television producers about their role. Welcome back. This is, of course, Meet the Media, and today in this special edition of the show, we have a look at some of the unsung heroes when it comes to television and radio. And joining me in this segment are two of the best television producers, Joanne and Laurie, who produced 3 Talk with Nolene for 8 years and is now head of creative at Urban Brew Studios, as well as Marva Kuselo, so one of my colleagues here. He's, of course, well known both in television and radio production at eNCA, as well as Power 98.7. Guys, thank you so much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for having us.
So weird seeing the producers looking sheepish in front of the camera.
What are we doing
when
here?
I know how relaxed both of you are as two of the best producers? How weird is it to be seated there?
It's horrific.
It's an unnatural feeling,
Completely.
I tell you.
I wasn't born for this life.
Let's have a bit of chat then, and you'll forget about the cameras. Marva, you work in both radio and in television.
Yes.
What are the differences between the mediums from a producer point of view?
Television is a team sport. You quickly learn that you cannot do anything on your own. You need your writers, your content producers, you need your editors. Radio, so much for me, it's more of a solitary thing. It's me and the presenter. We decide what we want to do. Sometimes I get to bully the presenter and get my way. Sometimes not. I produce current affairs, so on both mediums. So
You're good at both.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference? Which gives you more joy?
Oh, I think I love them equally, like my children. Equally but differently.
Joanne, how about you? What is the magic of producing? I mean, I always love being a guest on the show that you produced for so long. Excellent show with Nolene. You always had a smile on your face. You always seem to be driven. What is it about TV as a medium that turns you on?
Especially live TV, is that anything can happen. And that as much control, and producers are all control freaks. It's we're born control freaks. Regardless of how much control you think you have over something, it will show you flames, it will eat you, it'll surprise you. It's like getting an adrenaline rush every day of your life. It's like bungee jumping with no cord every day.
Every day.
It's the best feeling. There's no high like it. There just isn't.
I mean, I'm new to TV as a presenter. I love the intimacy of talk radio. What does the extra element of image allow you to play with as a producer that only having voice in radio doesn't allow you to do?
I think you get to bring whatever you are producing or working on at the moment really alive. People get to see it. That's very powerful. People being able to see what happened. Hearing, I mean, on the auditory side, it's different, but being able to see is very powerful. You can see the guy putting the hand in the cookie jar.
I disagree in a way. I actually think that TV, okay, so the best talk shows are basically, it's like talk radio on TV. That's the best talk shows. And it's almost a lazy viewers. Radio requires for you to use your imagination and really engage cerebrally, like think about, you know, what that, without the obvious outside image to see what they look like. I almost think it's a little bit lazier than radio. Radio, it really requires you to engage. TV, you can kind of just tune out a little bit because you're just watching what's happening on a screen sometimes.
Is this why you guys, I mean, sometimes the viewers are particularly lazy, but you guys seem to help them out, right? So I'm kind of learning as well as I'm observing what you as producers do on TV. So let's say we're having a chit-chat about Sean Abrams.
Yeah.
For the viewer, Marva, why do you guys decide at that point, okay, let's overlay the conversation with just imagery of a Sean Abrams presser that everyone has already seen? Isn't that what Joanne is talking about? I mean, surely people have that image already. Isn't this the equivalent of playing really sad music in a film scene to tell the viewer what to feel? Why do you feed the viewers like that?
Basically,
Why? Why do you
We do it because we want to make the viewers cry and we want to make television
It's
sexy.
also short attention span. You've got to like keep them engaged.
You do indeed.
But how do you make those creative choices? Because now that she mentions it, on Nolene's show, for example, we often had to rely on the narrative between her as the talk show host and the guest. How do you think about those choices?
It's quite instinctive. It's in your gut, in your feeling. You know that you don't want a talking face for for a certain amount of time on air. It's quite boring. It's different to TV where people are just listening to you. You think, okay, let's remind them what this guy looks like. The last time when he came out, Mr. Sean Abrams, and saying, you know, I have these charges ready for this guy. Let's remind the people. Yeah. Sometimes with visuals, not saying anything, muted in terms of audio, but you can see this is what leads to this moment that you may be discussing.
Joanne, you had us talking in the first segment about radio. And South African talk radio is very personality driven, at least in the typical South African talk radio format. Yeah. When it comes to the television shows that you've worked on, are they also centrally about the personality of the host, or is it much, much more narrative driven?
It's different. I've worked on a variety of different sort of genres and reality and music shows and quiz shows, and then it's about the content, it's not about the host. But when you host it, when you produce a talk show that's hosted and called 3 Talk with Nolene, that's Nolene's voice. Like, that is everything about that show is completely intrinsically linked to Nolene's personality. So then it becomes a very different ballgame, because you're not producing a generic show. You're producing a show that the presenter feels comfortable participating in. It's her show. You know, you've been on that, you won that show how many times? It's that show talks like Nolene, it walks like Nolene, it is Nolene.
Is that a good thing or bad thing? How hard is it to work with different personality types, Marva?
Well, I produce news here on eNCA, so that doesn't really matter. It doesn't really factor who's reading the news at what time or at what point of the night.
But you've worked with Justice Malala, with Dennis Davis. I've attempted to work with you and then you run away from me. You've worked with different people.
It doesn't matter on television for me. It's just you are going to do what you are told to do. Because the nice thing about television as well, with the presenter, you've got a lot less control, because you're looking at the camera, you're reading what's on the auto cue. I am writing that in the background. I can change it, and I don't have to consult you.
Sure.
Because the story develops.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more control to the producer on television.
It's very
probably
different.
than TV. We actually are the boss. Radio, completely different. The presenter is the talent.
Sometimes, Marva, there's a perception that TV is a shallow medium. They're going to be talking about my socks, about my hair being unkempt today. What is it about TV for you that has its own unique, special proposition compared to, say, radio? I mean, you know how much I love talking. And if you love your own voice, talk radio is great for you. One of the things I'm battling with as your presenter is the fact that we can't have long scripts, for example, in television. So what is the magic of television then? What can you do that really gives it its incredible power?
I think the images, the fact that you can see what has just happened, whether it's an earthquake or the damage, it hits home to people, to a lot of people. People remember what they see, remember images. They remember, that's why a photo of a kid, with the migration crisis, landing up on the beach in Turkey, quite a powerful one. Sometimes it speaks more than what any op-ed or column could ever say in the newspapers.
Joanne, give us a sense of what happens behind the scenes. Same question as with my radio producers that I had on earlier. What is the process that happens before you bring a show on? So by the time people tune in to, say, for example, Nolene, they might see Nolene interview Kenny with his bevy of young women around him, right? What would have been the production process beforehand? And more specifically, where would you have fitted into it?
Okay, so 3 Talk was a very small team, and it was pretty much the Nolene and Joe show. So we kind of fitted in everywhere. There was not really a process in the pre-production or production that I wasn't involved in. But it would probably start with conversations in the office. So that's where we got most of our content. Things that were happening in our lives, things that we debated about, things that we couldn't agree upon, was actually where we were like, okay, well, if we're arguing about this for so long, this is going to make good TV. So we'll probably start with a conversation in the office, then an awkward call to Kenny. And like, Kenny, do you and your 15 of your favorite girlfriends want to come on the show? And then we would go into research. Now, one of like my biggest joys with TV was surprising viewers with things that they would never be able to find on Google. Like, as far as I was concerned, if something was Googleable, it shouldn't be on the show. Because what was the point then?
That's very true.
So we would phone his friends, we would speak to his daughter, we would speak to him, have casual conversations with him to get information.
So the pre-interviews, the research.
Yeah, but often it happened less in terms of pick up the phone and do a pre-interview or send a questionnaire. It would be the conversations, the casual conversation. We would pick up stuff and make sure that that was part of the show, because that was very important for me. That, you know, because on talk show you can't rely so much on image and visual. It's storytelling, it's narrative. So we would then go into the research, we would write the scripts, write the questions, which Nolene would probably ignore most of the time. I knew if Nolene was following my questions, it was a bad show, because then obviously the conversation wasn't flowing
dynamic.
naturally.
Fair
Those
enough,
were a backup plan for her.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, I think both of us, Nolene and I, constantly spoke about the shows. So if the autocue blew up, she would know what the show is about.
Absolutely, yeah. Guys, I'm going to have to wrap it there and listen to my producer on this occasion. But thank you so much for coming. I love both of your work and hope that you get the due recognition in the public that you truly deserve. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Eusebius.
After the break, we chat to the makeup artists who also have enormous power and not just powder that makes it possible for us to look a little bit better than we sometimes actually are. Do stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. And in this final segment of today's show, I'm going to be chatting to some freelance hair and makeup artists, Rochelle James and Khotsola Kaja, who both work on various productions and who are also part of the team here at eNCA. Guys, thanks so much for joining us on set.
It's a pleasure
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Firstly, are you wearing your real faces or do you have makeup on?
That's a secret.
It all shall be revealed after the show.
How did you get into your profession?
For me, it was a long journey. I'm a photographer as well. So for 2 years, I did lots of photos and stuff, and I was tired of fixing a different color face and a neck, and I said, going to do makeup. And that's when the journey began 15 years ago.
Wow. And you've loved every moment of it?
Absolutely. No face is the same. It can be the same anchor sitting on your face, on your chair, and every day you get a different look. It's truly artistry when you work with people on an ongoing basis and you get to see them change and you change as an artist and you get better and better with the face the more you work.
So what has been your journey? How did you get into this profession?
I would say it found me by chance, actually, because I studied drama. I was doing drama, and then it got to a point where in my curriculum I had to add lighting, makeup, and wardrobe. So I was tired of auditions and everything, and I thought I was really good at makeup. Why don't I give it a shot? And till today.
Why are your jobs important? Let me explain that. You know, before I used to get into this industry, Rochelle, I used to think to myself, hi man, why do they have makeup artists like making people's faces look pretty? But when you go to, let's for example, the Vox Pops on the street and you have an insert on the news, it's not like we think half the time, oh gosh, if only that person, Tlampi, in the street first had makeup put on their face. Where does your role come in terms of making sure that the production is as slick as possible?
As we always say, it all starts in the makeup room because that's the first point of contact for a guest, be it a guest or an anchor, because I work on the Sunrise show on ETV and we're there from 4:30 in the morning. So it's actually a labor of love. It has to be a labor of love. You can't just do it as a job. You've got to love what you do because the hours are demanding and people pick up on your energy because you're in such close proximity with your anchor or with your guest that, you know, you have to be positive. You have to just, you have to be that, because to wake up for someone that doesn't work at 4:30 every morning and they're sitting in your chair, you've got to be that positive energy. And sometimes really hard, you've got to put yourself in the cupboard and say okay, the happy me needs to come out, but it's a very rewarding job.
So that is such a good point, isn't it? Because if the guest is being fetched, like literally, if we walk our viewers through the process, if someone comes downstairs to reception, they don't necessarily even meet the presenter first. They maybe get taken straight up to makeup. You are their first interaction with the production process. So your job is about far more than making sure that you get rid of a blemish on the face.
It really is, because if you tend to think about it, you have to step into a person's mood. And you deal with more than 5 or 10 people at a point. But you need to be, it's more, actually, if I may put it this way, more psychological than any other way. Because you must read a person's body language and how they dress. You must also actually establish what you're going to do on them, which is also in line with how they should be presentable on
Okay,
air.
spill the beans. I want some gossip. You must have had so many divas in there, politicians, presenters who are grumpy, people who take you for granted, even though, you know, how they look on TV depend on what you do, Rochelle. Have you ever got revenge and thought, I'm going to get you, little miss?
No, that's not my personality, actually. You know, the thing is, I'm sure Kotso will agree with me here. When it comes to someone and you know they're giving you a hard time, you want to do your best to make them say, oh, no, this person's not that bad. So your revenge is actually making them look better.
Okay.
That's a secret.
But that's because she's very nice. I also love sometimes getting gossip out of you guys. I've had makeup artists in the room saying to me, oh, you know this minister? He smelled so nice, Eusebius. So when I asked him, he said, it's none of your business what I'm wearing. You must have seen many personalities in the makeup room.
Well, it's very true. It's like a soap, each and every day it's a different soap opera episode, because you get different attitudes, different egos, like you've just said. But you, like I said, you just have to step in their zone and just be as calm and professional as you could be.
How much of the news do you have to also be on top of to get a sense of what particular programs are about to try and help put your guests at ease, Rochelle?
Yeah, definitely. That's the reason that we do get a guest list, which you're aware of that before a show. I try to always read it, see who they are, greet them by name. Like if they're a minister, give them the credit that they do. If they're a doctor, then good morning, doctor. It eases them down. It makes them realize, although we don't always know them personally, but the fact you know they're a doctor and they're here to talk about agriculture, or they're here to talk about human development. That type of thing. And also for me, what I find that really works and put our guests at ease is that I always say, how do you like your makeup? How do you wear your makeup? Because a lot of people, I'm sure Koto will bear me out in this, come with their horror stories. They already have a wall up
Fear
against
the
them,
makeup.
like, yes, like, okay,
Yeah.
makeup artist. And they look at us and then, you know, it just comes in, they're like, how do you like your makeup, ma'am? Do you like to be matte? What lips do you like? And then it calms them down, and yeah, it's easy.
Final
from
question
there.
very quickly, Khotso. Do you have a preference between male, female guests? Are any of them particularly easy or not?
Preferably, I prefer female.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's, well, artistically, you get more creative, and there's always more juicy stories that comes with it. So male normally just sit there and then you do what you're doing and they're gone.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you guys do great work. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rochelle. I see you a lot on a Sunday for making sure that I don't ever show my real face on television. Thanks for coming on set as well.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this week's edition of Meet the Media. Thank you so much for having tuned in, and have yourselves a wonderful week ahead. Bye-bye.